The last war did not end with silence. It ended with a scream so vast it seemed to split creation itself. The sky above hell was no sky at all, only a ceiling of burning iron and writhing clouds made from tortured souls. Mountains of bones pierced the horizon like the broken teeth of a dead god. Rivers of molten blood carved their way through valleys of shattered skulls. The air was a choking mixture of sulfur, ash, and the copper-sweet stench of endless slaughter. At the center of this apocalypse stood a solitary figure, the Doomslayer. His armor was blackened and scarred, its runes glowing faintly like dying embers. Every dent and fracture was a memory of wars that could not be counted, of demons that had begged, screamed, and burned beneath his fists. In his gauntleted hand rested a blade forged not by mortals, but by suffering and unrelenting fury. Its edge shimmered with a pale, hungry light. Before him rose the last fortress of hell, a cathedral of flesh and iron, its spires formed from twisted angel wings, its walls pulsing like living meat. The ground trembled with every distant roar, the final breaths of a realm that knew extinction had come. He had not known fear for centuries. He had not known doubt, only purpose. Kill them all. The gates of the fortress exploded outward as he charged. Demons poured forth in an endless tide, towering horned colossi, shrieking winged abominations, crawling masses of teeth and claw. They moved as one, a desperate flood trying to drown the thing that ended worlds. The first blow split a titan of fire in half. The second shattered a beast of brass and bone. Bolts of hell flame struck his armor and died, unable to claim him. Chains, barbs, and spectral hands clawed at his limbs, and he tore through them like mist. For what felt like an eternity, the world was nothing but violence, the rhythm of slaughter, the sacred litany of destruction. And then silence fell, not the silence of victory, but the silence of something noticing him. The sky lay open. It was not a wound of fire or darkness. It was a hole in reality itself, an impossible fracture filled with cold, distant stars. A cosmic scream echoed through hell as the fabric of existence twisted around that growing void. From within it came a presence, not a demon, not a god. Something older, colder, vast, beyond comprehension. The ground beneath the Doomslayer cracked, and a circle of runes unlike anything in hell or earth ignited around him. They were neither infernal nor divine. They pulsed with a light that felt wrong. The surviving demonic horde stopped. For the first time in their eternal existence, they knew terror. They recognized that light. It was not death. It was erasure. The Slayer raised his blade and turned toward the rift. There was no hesitation, no confusion. Whether god or void, whether fate or trap, he would meet it with violence, as he had met all things. The rift expanded violently. Gravity twisted sideways. The bones of the world began to lift into the air, suspended like dust in a storm. The fortress groaned, its living walls tearing themselves apart as if trying to flee. The runes flared brighter. The Doomslayer was pulled from the ground. For the first time since his eternal war began, his feet left the battlefield unwillingly. The void consumed him. There was no light, no darkness, only cold, infinite pressure, as if the universe itself were pressing in around his soul. He could not move. He could not breathe. Time stretched and shattered like fragile glass. Visions bled into his mind unbidden, a golden throne surrounded by 1,000 screaming psychers, endless cathedral cities crawling across alien worlds, gigantic warriors clad in ceramite, marching in perfect soulless order, a corpse emperor bound to a machine that drank souls like water. He did not understand these images, yet they burned themselves into him like brands. The void twisted. A colossal, armored coffin of metal and stasis drifted before him. It was shaped like a weapon, a cradle and a bomb in one. Ancient systems awakened as his presence triggered them. Machines older than empires stirred, responding to a soul that should not exist in this universe. Lightning of pure, absent color coiled around him. His armor began to crack, not from damage, from rejection. This world would not accept him as he was. The runes returned, no longer hells, but something older and crueler. Symbols of gene forging, of stolen divinity, of artificial gods crafted in secret laboratories beneath holy terror. The coffin opened, and unseen hands of force began to drag him inside. He fought. He tore at invisible bonds. But this was not a demon's strength. This was the will of an empire that had conquered nightmare itself. The door slammed shut. Stasis engines ignited. And in the final instant before consciousness vanished, he felt something. A presence, vast and distant, turning its gaze upon him. Something sitting upon a throne of gold. Something that had watched 10,000 years of war. Something that wondered whether he was a gift or a disaster. The pod ignited and vanished into the warp, and the last thought of the Doomslayer, before even hatred could follow him into the dark, was a simple, burning question. What kind of war waits for me now? The pod fell from the sky like a wounded star. Across the surface of a forgotten world, ash-choked winds howled through broken cities and rusted battlefields. The planet had no name, only a number in the endless ledgers of the Imperium, and even that number had been half erased by time. The sky was the color of old bruises, and the sun burned weakly through thick curtains of chemical cloud. War had once been fought here so completely that even peace had died. The impact was not gentle. The drop pod struck the earth with the sound of a god's hammer, sending a shock wave through the wasteland. Cracked ferrocrete shattered. Ancient bones that had slept for centuries were thrown screaming into the air. The pod half buried itself in the ground, steaming as its surface bled strange light into the toxic atmosphere. Within, the air was frozen in lifeless suspension. Stasis failed. Time returned to one small chamber shaped like a coffin. The armored figure within did not breathe, but did not decay. The transformation began at once, written into his flesh by machines that had never known mercy. Bones stretched and thickened with grinding cracks. Muscles swelled, woven with fibers grown from the Emperor's own genetic legacy. Organs multiplied where none should exist. Secondary hearts, reinforced lungs, vessels meant to pump alchemical fury instead of mere blood. His armor broke apart, unable to contain what he was becoming. The stasis locks disengaged. The coffin opened. He fell into the world on hands that could now crush stone. For a long moment, he did not move. The Doomslayer was no more. Not in name, not in form, but in silence. The thing that had been him endured. Nearby, a scavenger camp stirred. The people who lived among these ruins had once been soldiers, perhaps, or citizens of a forgotten Imperium. Now they were gaunt, hollow-eyed survivors clothed in scavenged cloth and rusting plates of armor. They lived by stripping the dead worlds of their bones and memories, trading scrap metal and yesterday's war for another day of breath. One of them saw the pod. He froze. "Starfall," he whispered, dropping to his knees. Others gathered at a distance, clutching crude firearms and rusted blades. They dared not approach, but they watched as mist poured from the open pod. They saw a figure rise from within. At first they thought it was a god. Then they thought it was a monster. Finally, they understood it was something worse. The child was already taller than a man. His eyes burned with a muted, smouldering fury that had no language yet. His skin was pale, marked with faint scars that belonged to another life. His chest rose slowly, unfamiliar with the rhythm of breath. Machines had shaped him into a Primarch, but they had not erased what lay beneath. He looked at the wasteland. Something in him recognized it, not as a memory, as a feeling. Ruins, desolation, the echoes of violence so old they had become part of the air. This felt right. He stepped forward. The ground cracked softly beneath his weight. The scavengers flinched back, some of them weeping openly, others whispering broken prayers they barely remembered. One of the older ones, a woman with metal driven through her jaw and eyes burned white by radiation, found the strength to speak. "Are you our end?" she asked, her voice trembling like tearing paper. He did not answer. He could not. He did not yet have words. Something howled in the far distance. Not wind, not animal. Something mechanical, vast, and ancient. A shadow passed over the poison clouds above, long and angular. A surge pattern, imperial. The child looked up, pupils narrowing, instincts awakening. Somehow, impossibly, he felt it. A distant pull, a presence, not friendly, not cruel, watching, judging. The scavengers saw it too, a black speck in the sky growing larger, resolving into the brutal silhouette of a Thunderhawk gunship. Crimson icons flashed along its wings. The symbol of the Imperium burned upon its hull like a brand of fire. One by one, the mortals dropped to their knees. "Angels," they whispered. The child did not kneel. He turned back to the open pod, looking into the darkness where he had been remade. Something in that darkness felt like a tomb he had crawled from, a prison that had tried to cage his fury. He clenched his hands. The sound of metal deforming echoed through the ruins as the ruined armor at his feet warped and folded under his grip. The Thunderhawk descended, engines screaming like tortured beasts. Its weapons tracked him instantly. Auto-targeting spirits whispered to the gunners of an impossible biological anomaly below. Inside the gunship, robed figures and armored giants watched through Auspex screens, feeling something shift in the fate of the sector. The ramp began to lower, and the newly born Primarch stood amidst ash and bone, facing the approaching angels of a corpse god's empire, with no memory of who he had been, only the certainty that war had found him again. And somewhere deep within his newly forged soul, a question began to form, sharp and burning. Were these warriors his salvation, or his first enemies? The Thunderhawk's ramp slammed into the poisoned earth with a sound like a coffin being sealed. Hot exhaust washed over the ruins, scattering ash and peeling flakes of rust from ancient bones. The scavengers pressed their faces into the dirt, whispering fractured prayers and begging gods that could no longer hear them. To them, the descending figures were not men. They were legends given shape, angels of a throne-bound corpse that still ruled the galaxy through fear and fire. Ceramite boots struck the ground. 3 giants emerged, their armor the deep red of coagulated blood, trimmed with bone-white purity seals that fluttered like the tongues of dead saints. Their helms were skull-faced, vox grills hissing softly as machine spirits tasted the air. Behind them came robed figures, their flesh hidden beneath layers of incense-soaked cloth and bronze augmetics. Red lenses of the Mechanicus gleamed beneath hooded cowls, and servo skulls drifted like patient vultures overhead. They saw him, the child of war. Auspex arrays flickered violently. Biological readings spiked beyond established gene templates. Psychic echoes distorted the noosphere like a stone thrown into sacred water. Data streamed across retinal displays, each line of code ending in the same forbidden word. Impossible. The lead Astartes raised a massive bolt pistol, its barrel aligning perfectly with the figure's chest. His voice, amplified through vox and sanctified machine code, rolled across the ruins. Entity, kneel and submit to the authority of the Imperium of Man. You will not resist. You will not flee. The child did not move. Incense burned in thick braziers carried by shambling servo platforms. The air filled with the smell of sacred oils and scorched myrrh. Binary prayers hissed through the air, a mechanical litany meant to ward off demons and worse. The robed Magos stepped forward, metal fingers twitching as data spikes slid from beneath his sleeves. Cables slithered out, tasting the atmosphere, pulling fragments of energy into waiting cogitators. Not warp-born, the Magos whispered, his voice layered with the buzzing undertone of machine harmonics. Not Xenos, not demonic. His optical array shifted to a narrow, focused beam, but not natural. The Astartes tensed, weapons whirred as their machine spirits prepared to sing. The child's eyes passed over them slowly. There was no fear there. There was no reverence. Only a silent assessment. The way a predator measures distance. The way a storm recognizes a mountain it intends to shatter. A step forward. The earth cracked. Bolters rose in unison, and targeting runes flickered crimson in the visors of the Space Marines. The Magos raised a mechadendrite. Wait, it rasped. This is not a foe. This is a relic. The word tasted like heresy. They moved closer, cautiously, their every footfall slow and deliberate. Servo skulls descended, their lenses flashing as they recorded every breath, every twitch, every impossible detail. The Magos extended a sensor spike, stopping inches from the child's chest. Subject displays accelerated genetic architecture, it intoned. Secondary cardiac structures, reinforced skeletal lattice, dermal density consistent with post-human Astartes design, but older. Purity level, unprecedented. The air grew tense. Behind the Astartes, one of the ecclesiarchy priests stepped forward, clutching a chain-bound tome and a crackling power maul. His eyes were wide with zealous terror. "This is not of the Emperor," he hissed. "This is something forged in darkness. It must be purged before its presence poisons this world." The Magos did not turn. "Your faith is noted," it said flatly. "Your conclusion is not verified." The priest's hand tightened around his weapon. The child's head tilted slightly. The first hint of instinct. The first echo of his former self. The priest saw it and felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Kill it," he whispered. The trigger was pulled. The bolt was a thunderclap. It should have torn through flesh, exploded in sanctified fury, and scattered the mystery across the dust. Instead, the child moved. He did not dodge. He caught it. The bolter round flattened against his palm, crushed by fingers that had not yet learned mercy. The explosive core detonated harmlessly in a brief flash of light, contained completely by his grip. Silence fell. The wind itself seemed to stop. The Space Marines did not fire again, not out of fear, out of something far older and more dangerous. Recognition. The Magos' optical arrays brightened, its voice dropping to something almost reverent. "By the Omnissiah." The priest staggered back, horror clawing at his faith. The child looked at the crushed shell in his hand, then at the giants of ceramite and faith who stood before him. He felt something settle into place within his soul, like a blade sliding perfectly into a waiting sheath. They were not angels. They were not saviors. They were weapons, like him. Above, the Thunderhawk's engines growled, awaiting commands. In the distance, other signals awakened. Long-range Vox bursts shot through the void, carrying whispers of a discovery that should not exist. On Terra, somewhere beneath the weight of 10,000 years of silence and pain, a corpse god felt a faint, distant disturbance ripple across the Imperium. And in the ruined wasteland, surrounded by steel and scripture, the reborn Primarch took another step forward, unknowingly walking toward a destiny soaked in blood and betrayal, as the Imperium began to wonder whether it had just found its greatest weapon or its most catastrophic mistake. The signal reached Terra as a whisper buried beneath a million other cries. In the hollowed heart of the Imperium, where the air was thick with incense and the walls wept with sacred oils, astropathic choirs collapsed in unison, their mouths filled with blood, their eyes burned away within their skulls. And through their ruin, a message was carried, not by words, but by instinctive terror. On a throne of cables, golden sigils, and endless sacrifice, something stirred. The Emperor of mankind did not open his eyes. He had not done so in 10,000 years. His body was a monument to suffering and endurance, a relic chained to a machine that drank souls to keep a fading god alive. The chamber around him was vast beyond mortal comprehension, a cathedral of wires and bone where silence was enforced by death. Yet within the Imperium, his presence remained, a sun that could not be extinguished, a mind that refused to fade. The whisper reached him as a tremor in the endless psychic storm surrounding his broken form. It was not a sound. It was not a thought. It was a sensation, a wrongness. He saw, not with eyes of flesh, but with a consciousness stretched across a fractured galaxy, a child standing in a wasteland of ash, ceramite giants holding weapons in uncertain hands, a soul that did not fit within the designs he had once written into the stars. The Emperor gazed through layers of time, past the static of the warp and the screaming of 1,000 bound demons. He looked into that soul and felt something he had not felt since before the heresy. Recognition, not of form, but of purpose. That soul was a weapon. It had been a weapon long before it had ever known him. He saw flashes of another existence, a universe of raw hatred and endless night, where demons wore flesh and hell was not metaphor but place. He saw endless corridors slick with blood, ancient fortresses torn apart by bare hands, the sacred intimacy of violence performed for no god and no empire. He saw rage without corruption. He saw wrath without temptation, a purity of destruction that had never bent knee to darkness. This was no demon, no Xenos, no warp-born abomination. This was something forged by war itself. The Golden Throne groaned as ancient systems strained beneath the subtle shift of his will. Adepts and custodians moved nervously in the shadows, feeling a pressure in the air that no instrument could measure. The Astronomicon flickered, just slightly, like a star suffering a brief, impossible doubt. The Emperor turned his attention fully upon the child. Knowledge unfolded, gene forges igniting inside a stasis pod, forbidden templates awakening, the work of hands that had tried to imitate his own. Someone had tampered with destiny, had stolen from his designs, had dared to make a Primarch outside his plan. Approval did not come, nor did anger, only calculation. He traced the threads of fate forward and backward. Thousands of futures bloomed and died in his sight. In some, the child became a blade of unmatched brilliance, carving through the enemies of man like a divine storm. In others, he became a catastrophe, a wound in reality through which damnation poured. In too many, he became a secret, buried, erased, forgotten. The Emperor understood something heavy and terrible in that instant. This being was not born. He was placed, thrown, as if some unseen hand had reached between universes and scattered a spark into his decaying empire. Outside the chamber, the custodes felt it, a pressure behind their eyes, a weight on their souls. They tightened their grips upon guardian spears, as if preparing for an invasion that existed only in spirit. Deep in the labyrinthine systems of the Imperium's most forbidden archives, cogitators wailed. Sealed records shifted. Names that had not been spoken in 10 millennia trembled on rusting data slates. Back on the poisoned world, the child lifted his face to the broken sky. He felt it then, not as voice, not as command, as a presence, immense, ancient, watching. The blood-red armored giants felt it too. Their gene-forged hearts stuttered in their chests. Vox systems crackled with static. Targeting runes vanished and reappeared without pattern. The magos froze mid-motion, mechadendrites hanging uselessly in the air. The throne, it whispered. For a fraction of a second longer than any mortal time could measure, the Emperor of Mankind considered annihilation, a psychic erasure, a burning out of the anomaly before it could poison fate further. It would be simple, contained, clean. But he did not, because he saw something else. Beyond rage, beyond slaughter, a strange shattered sense of justice, a will that did not kneel to chaos, a hatred that did not belong to the warp. The throne's tortured machinery creaked as sympathy, long dead, brushed against his soul. Very few things could surprise a god. This one did. He withdrew his gaze slightly, leaving only the faintest lingering shadow of his presence behind. A test. He would not destroy this thing yet. He would not bless it. He would watch. Back in the ruins of the dead world, the child shuddered as the weight of a god's attention faded from him. He did not understand what had touched his soul, only that something had measured him and chosen to let him live. Above, the sky grew darker. Far away, in chambers of black stone and screaming logic, the high lords of terror began to sense that fate had shifted. And in the silent chamber of the golden throne, the Emperor of Mankind wondered something no one had heard him wonder in 10,000 years. Had he just glimpsed his greatest hope, or the seed of his final damnation? They did not take him to a city. They did not take him to a world of light. They took him to a forge. Across the void, within a hollowed asteroid wrapped in iron and prayer, the Imperium began to build around him. The world chosen for his shaping was a fortress of machinery and faith, a ring of steel continents known only to the highest tiers of the Mechanicus and hidden from imperial record. Its sky was false, a ceiling of flickering lumens and drifting incense smog. Its ground trembled constantly, not from war, but from industry so vast it felt like a planet's heartbeat. There, under the watchful optics of red-robed priests and the silent guard of gene-augmented giants, his legion was born. They were not chosen from comfort. They were torn from ruin. War orphans, feral survivors, ferocity-eyed children gathered from radiation deserts, hive slums, and plague-racked moons. Those who screamed too loudly were discarded. Those who broke were recycled. Only the ones who endured in silence remained. They were brought before him in lines of trembling flesh and hollow hunger. He watched them without expression. He understood them. They were like the scavengers, like the dead worlds, like the endless battlefields. They were empty, and emptiness was something he knew well. The trials began. They were locked inside iron labyrinths filled with scalding steam and whispering vents that exhaled sacred toxins into their lungs. They were given blades not to spar, but to survive each other. They were fed nothing but nutrient paste that tasted of ash and old blood. They were made to kneel inside chambers where recordings of warp screams echoed endlessly, breaking weaker minds into weeping ruin. Some died quickly, some begged, some clawed their own eyes out to escape the visions. He watched all of it. He did not stop it, because he understood. This galaxy was not mercy. This galaxy was endurance. One by one, those who survived were dragged, unconscious and broken, into surgical halls that stank of antiseptic incense and cauterized flesh. Their bones were sawed apart and reinforced with ceramite-infused alloys. Their organs were rewritten by machines whose praises had been etched into their own blades. Gene seed touched their blood, and through that blood, he was written into them, not as memory, as instinct, as fury. They rose from their operating slabs as something no longer fully human. Their eyes reflected the glow of red autosensors. Their hearts beat with the rhythm of chemical hate. Their skin grew pale and scarred not from weakness, but from becoming. They were given armor, not the ceremonial gold of noble chapters, not the proud heraldry of ancient legions. Their ceramite was ashen grey and scorched black, as if it had already survived 1,000 wars. Their helms were skull-faced, their lenses glowing like coals buried in a grave. Chains wrapped their shoulders, not as ornament, but as reminder. They walked before him and knelt without command. They could not explain why. They only knew he was theirs. He stepped among them. He did not speak. He did not bless. But when he stood near, their gene-forged blood answered. Their bones tightened. Their minds sharpened. Their hatred found direction. This was not love. This was recognition. In the deepest halls of the Forge Moon, a name was debated, not spoken aloud at first, written in data slate and withdrawn, burned and rewritten, finally whispered. A legion born of furnace and fury, a Primarch who did not smile, did not preach, did not boast. He did not inspire with words. He inspired with inevitability. They called themselves the Ashen Wrath. The first warriors to bear his mark knelt again, this time not in awe, but in readiness. Bolters were placed into their hands, blades locked magnetically to their backs. Auto-reactive targeting arrays flickered to life. They were shown enemies, chaos reavers burning through a mining sector, mutant cults infecting imperial worlds, heretics who had forgotten the taste of fear. The Primarch looked upon the tactical hololith. He felt something stir, not memory, instinct, a rhythm older than his rebirth. Kill. The doors of the Forge Fortress opened. The Ashen Wrath marched out in silence, boots striking iron in perfect timing. Dropships screamed through vacuum and real space alike, their machine spirits eager for blood. He stood at the forefront of them, unhelmed, his gaze fixed upon the stars. The warp trembled as they passed. In distant corners of the Imperium, astropaths began to scream warnings they could not understand. In the eye of terror, demons turned their twisted heads toward a pressure building beyond their sight. Something was coming, something new, something that felt uncomfortably familiar. He felt it too, the pull of war, not as duty, not as command, as belonging. The fleet translated into the warp, engines howling like caged beasts, carrying a newborn legion toward its first baptism of fire. And as reality twisted around their vessels and the Imperium began to whisper against the hulls, the reborn Primarch felt the old certainty return to his soul. If there was war in this galaxy, then this galaxy would learn to fear him. And somewhere, far ahead in the dark, his first true enemy was already waiting. The warp spat them back into reality like a wound tearing open. Stars reappeared as cold pinpricks of distant light, and the black hulls of the Ashen Wrath fleet slid from the Imperium, trailing ghostly frost and screaming machine spirits. The void before them was filled with ruin. Broken transport hulks drifted like corpses in a lightless sea. A mining world hung below, its surface blistered and burning, its once stable cities now warped into jagged scars of fire and madness. This was no common rebellion. This was corruption. A chaos warband had come like a plague. Their ships were barbed and twisted, covered in blasphemous sigils that crawled across their hulls like living scars. Vox channels screamed with broken prayers to dark gods, filling the void with madness even before the first shot was fired. Within the flagship of the Ashen Wrath, the Primarch stood alone upon the bridge. He did not wear a helm. He did not need to. The world below called to him. He could feel it, not with thought, but with instinct. Down there something was wrong in the way only he understood. Like hell had been wrong. Like demons had worn the world's skin. Around him, his sons waited. Their armor hummed softly, targeting systems flickering awake. They said nothing. They did not need speeches or prayers. They felt his anticipation like a storm building in their gene-forged blood. The order was not spoken. It was felt. Drop. The sky over the tainted world filled with fire. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing white-hot as they punched through clouds of ash and chemical storm. The air itself peeled away in burning shockwaves. Chaos anti-air batteries roared, filling the sky with flak and corrupted machine fire. The first pod struck the surface like divine wrath. Its doors exploded outward, and the Ashen Wrath emerged. Bolt guns roared as one. The sound was not noise. It was a statement. Heretics died in pieces. Cultists were torn apart mid-prayer. Traitor Astartes turned just in time to register figures walking calmly through fire, unmoved by fear or corruption. Then the Primarch landed. He did not use a pod. He fell like a meteor. The ground collapsed beneath his impact, forming a crater of breaking stone and liquefying metal. Shockwaves knocked corrupted warriors from their feet, shattering bones and armor alike. Dust and ash rose around him like a crown. The warband's champion charged, a towering figure of warped ceramite, his body swollen by the blessings of dark gods. A chain axe screamed in his hands, its teeth dripping with sacred oil and infected blood. The Primarch met him in silence. The first blow from the chain axe struck his chest and failed to draw blood. The second he caught, metal deformed with a shriek, as impossible fingers twisted the weapon into a useless coil of broken teeth. The champion tried to scream. The Primarch's fist passed through the traitor's chest, not with hatred, with inevitability. The battlefield changed. Wherever he walked, chaos folded. Demons clawed their way into reality and were torn apart before their claws could touch the ground. Sorcerers chanted in blasphemous tongues and died with their throats crushed before the final syllable could escape. The Ashen Wrath moved like extensions of his will. They did not charge. They advanced, step by step, bolt by bolt. Heresy was not fought. It was erased. Above, orbital batteries of corrupted warships fired blindly at the surface. Beams of warped light carved trenches through the burning cities. The Primarch felt it. He looked up through the ash-choked sky and leapt. The force of his jump fractured the ground again, a thundercrack echoing across the battlefield as he ascended into the air like a god of war. He struck a descending chaos gunship with his bare hands, ripping through its corrupted hull, tearing its pilot free before casting both into the flames of their own wreckage. He landed atop a cliff of fused metal and surveyed the battlefield. The warband was breaking, but something remained. A presence. Beneath the surface. Calls from below. The earth split open. A warp gate flowered like a wound, spewing black smoke and screaming entities into real space. From it stepped a being that made even the traitor Astartes fall back. A lesser demon prince. Its form was a cathedral of horns, wings of skinless bone, a blade that bled living fire. Its voice slithered into the world. "I remember you," it whispered, though they had never met. "You are wrong. You are stolen. You do not belong to this sky." The Primarch did not answer. He walked forward. The ground froze and burned beneath his feet. The demon struck first, its blade carving reality apart. The Primarch stepped through the attack, ignoring wounds that would have killed gods. His hands closed around the demon's throat. They struggled. Warp energy screamed. Reality buckled. The demon's laughter turned into choking disbelief. Then silence. The creature was torn in half. The gate closed. The battlefield fell quiet. The surviving heretics fled, or were hunted down. The ashen wrath stood amid burning ruins and drifting ash, their weapons cooling, their hearts still burning with the rhythm of purpose. Above, Imperial observers watched in silence. They had expected victory. They had not expected annihilation. The Primarch looked toward the stars again. Something had noticed him. Something older than this warband. Something listening. And as the fires of the conquered world burned into the sky, a new whisper passed through the warp. The war had found him, and it was afraid. But somewhere beyond the veil of real space, a darker power began to stir, preparing a response that no battlefield could contain. Victory did not bring him rest. The fleet hung in orbit around the burned world, its engines humming softly as repair servitors stitched ceramite and steel back together. Fires still crawled across the planet's surface like wounds that refused to close. The warp churned quietly in the distance, unsettled by what had been done. Within the flagship, the Primarch stood alone. There were no windows, no natural light. Only the red glow of lumen strips and the faint, ever-present scent of sacred oils and ozone. The walls were engraved with invocations to the Emperor and warnings against corruption, etched so deeply that even time could not erase them. He did not read them. He felt something else, a pressure behind his eyes. At first, it was only a flicker, a flash of metal corridors slick with blood, a scream that did not belong to this universe, a sensation of hands wrapped around a weapon that was not of the Imperium. He dismissed it. Memory was weakness, or so he had been told. But the visions did not fade. They grew sharper. He saw a sky not filled with ash, but with fire and impossible geometry. He felt heat that did not come from plasma or melter, but from hellfire. He felt armor around his body that was not ceramite, inscribed not with prayers to the Emperor, but with runes of pure defiance. He gripped the edge of a command dais. The metal bent. His reflection stared back at him in its warped surface. A being of towering strength, war-scarred and reforged, eyes glowing faintly with something that no Mechanicus priest could catalogue. Blood behind the eyes, old blood, alien blood, another life. Footsteps echoed behind him. He did not turn. He already knew who it was. One of his sons approached, not timidly, not boldly, simply as a soldier moving toward a commander. His armor bore the scars of their first battle, blackened by fire, marked with kill tallies etched with devotional care. "My lord," the Space Marine said. The words felt strange in the air. "My lord." The Primarch did not answer. The warrior hesitated only a fraction of a second before continuing. "The fleet awaits your command. The Mechanicus requests authorization to study the demonic remains before they are purged." Silence stretched. The Primarch felt the presence of his son not just behind him, but within him. The genetic echo, the shared hunger for battle, the instinct that reached upward to him not out of worship, but alignment. He turned slowly. The Space Marine's auto-senses flickered for a heartbeat. Something in his gene seed reacted to what it saw. Not fear, not confusion, recognition and unease. "They fear you," the Primarch said. His voice was low. Gravel dragged through fire. The warrior stiffened. "Only heretics and traitors fear what they do not understand." The Primarch stepped closer. The deck creaked beneath his weight. "And the Imperium?" he asked. The warrior did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. After the warrior left, alone once more, the visions returned stronger. He saw corridors of flesh and bone. He saw demons crushed beneath his hands. He saw a blade of argent light cleaving through abominations that screamed not in blasphemy, but in familiarity. Rage that was not new to him. Rage that had lived in him longer than this galaxy had existed. He staggered slightly, placing a hand against the wall. The Emperor, the throne, the Imperium. These things were new. War was not. He walked the halls of his own ship, silent as a shadow of death. Servitors bowed their heads without understanding why. Cherub skulls fluttered away from his path, their tiny, mechanical hearts stuttering in his presence. In a sealed chamber, deep within the ship's armored core, he found what he had not known he was searching for. A relic vault. Within was stored the broken weaponry of the traitor champion he had slain. The twisted chain axe lay upon a stasis altar, its teeth frozen mid-scream. He reached for it. The machine spirits howled. Red warning sigils flared across the air. It should have resisted him. It should have spat warp corruption into his flesh. Instead, it went silent at his touch. The visions intensified. This metal, this rage, this silence after slaughter. This was not new. This was older than this galaxy. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, he was no longer on an Imperial ship. He was somewhere else. A world of endless corridors and demonic screams. A war without flags, without prayers, without gods demanding worship. Only enemies, only extermination. He pulled his hand back from the weapon. Reality settled, but it did not seal shut. He understood now. He had not been empty when he awoke in the pod. He had been buried beneath layers of new flesh, new purpose, new chains. But the thing he had been before still lived, and it was beginning to wake. The ship's vox crackled. Emergency runes flared briefly before being suppressed. Far out in the void, something moved. Not a fleet, not a demon. A thought, a suspicion. Somewhere cloaked in black ships and darker authority, the Inquisition began to trace the irregularity in reality that was his existence. The Primarch walked toward the bridge, each step heavy with the slow convergence of two selves, trying to exist in the same soul. He did not know which one would win. He only knew that what was awakening behind his eyes was not loyal to thrones, not loyal to empires. It was loyal only to war. And as the stars stretched before him and the next battlefield drew closer, the question burned in his mind like a brand pressed into living flesh. Was he a servant of the Emperor, or merely a butcher wearing a new crown? The shadows of the Imperium were never empty. They stretched across star systems, crawled through data slates, whispered through cathedral halls, and drowned entire civilizations without a single hymn being sung. Where the Imperium claimed light, the Inquisition lived in darkness, measuring purity not in faith, but in survival. The first report was discarded. An anonymous Mechanicus transmission flagged as data corruption, a mention of impossible genetic purity, of a warrior who crushed warp-touch steel with bare hands, of a legion that burned heresy too quickly, too cleanly, too perfectly. The second report was archived, filed under anomalies better left unanswered. The third report reached a cell that did not ignore such things. A black ship, silent and unmarked, adjusted its course through the void. Its hull bore no heraldry, only null fields and prayers designed to choke the warp itself. Within, a handful of souls planned a death that must never be recorded. The Primarch felt it before they arrived, not as fear, as tension. The air in his ship grew heavier. The machine spirits whispered more urgently through the walls. Astropaths curled in their chambers, screaming about eyes in the dark between stars. The Ashen Wrath fleet received transmission orders coded with Imperial authority so absolute that refusal did not exist. A summon, terror, validation, recognition, or a noose. His sons did not question it. They prepared their ships, locked their armor, performed their weapon litanies with grim efficiency. One of them came to him. "My lord," the warrior said, kneeling once more without command. "This is an honor granted to few." The Primarch looked beyond him, through walls of metal and void, sensing the absence behind the message. "This is a test," he said. The warrior did not ask how he knew. The fleet altered course. As they neared the given coordinates, the stars began to feel wrong. The warp recoiled. Geller fields whispered at a higher pitch. The silence of space thickened until even the engines sounded muted. Then the trap revealed itself. Black ships slid from nowhere. They did not translate from warp. They did not decloak. They simply appeared, as if they had been waiting in a space that did not exist until needed. Their hulls swallowed light. Their prows bristled with weapons designed not for battle, but extermination. A Vox channel opened, cutting through every system. "This is the holy orders of the Emperor's Inquisition," a voice said, calm and utterly without mercy. "Primarch designate, you will halt your vessels and submit to immediate inspection. Any resistance will be interpreted as heresy of the highest degree." The bridge of the flagship fell into silence. Every warrior felt it. Not fear, but anger. The Primarch stepped forward. "Hold fire," he said. The word surprised even himself. This was not a battlefield. Not yet. Invasive beams of scanning energy lanced through the hulls. Psyker sense swept through decks and gene vaults. Data spikes stabbed into sacred machine spirits. In hidden chambers, robed figures watched the streams. "Gene pattern is unregistered," one whispered. "No match to any known Primarch template," another said. "And yet," a third murmured, "he walks like one." A smaller vessel detached from the Black Fleet and locked to the flagship. Boarding clamps engaged. Mag boots struck metal. The Inquisitor stepped through smoke and holy fog. He wore no ostentatious armor, no grand sigils, only a long coat of blackened hide, a rosette of carved adamantium, and eyes that had watched worlds burn without flinching. Behind him walked stormtroopers and silent sister-like figures whose very presence strangled psychic disturbance. He approached the Primarch without fear. "You are not in any record," the Inquisitor said. "You are not in the Emperor's known plan. And yet, you exist." The Primarch felt the null field pressing against his senses. A cage of emptiness. a tool designed to suffocate beings like him if needed. "What do you want?" he asked. The Inquisitor's gaze was steady. "Truth," he said, "or proof that you must die." Silence fell between them. Deep within the ship, the Primarch felt the thing behind his eyes stir. The old rage, the older war, the instinct to tear threats apart. The Inquisitor watched him closely, calculating, weighing not muscle or size, but the flicker of something in his gaze that should not belong to a loyal servant of the Imperium. "Your legion burns too cleanly," the Inquisitor said quietly. "You leave no survivors to interrogate, no artifacts to study, no taint to analyze. That is not how the Imperium fights." "That is how you survive," the Primarch replied. The Inquisitor smiled slightly. "Or how you hide." Outside the hull, the black ships activated weapon arrays, not targeting the fleet, targeting the Primarch's ship. One thought from the Inquisitor would be enough. Inside, tension coiled like a blade about to break. The Inquisitor leaned slightly closer. "If you are what you appear to be," he said, "then you are a miracle we cannot afford. And if you are not—" His hand brushed the activation rune of a device that could collapse half a sector into nothingness. "Then you are a catastrophe we must erase." The Primarch felt every weapon, every human heart, every machine spirit locked in fragile stillness. One wrong motion, one wrong word, and war would erupt inside his own steel womb. The old instincts rose higher. Kill the threat, crush the danger, end the voice. But another instinct, newer and colder, held him still. Endure, adapt, survive. The question burned behind his eyes as it never had before. Would he break the Imperium's chains, or let them tighten around his throat? The first shots were never recorded. No astropath screamed their warning. No chronicle etched the betrayal into adamantine tablets. In the Imperium's endless archives, the war that followed would exist only as corrupted data and inexplicable gaps. It began with a whisper, a hand resting too close to a detonator rune, a glance exchanged between black-helmed troopers, a subtle shift in the posture of a stormtrooper who had been told long before this moment that if the Primarch moved the wrong way, he was to erase him from existence. The Inquisitor felt it. So did the Primarch. "You are not what you were meant to be," the Inquisitor said softly. "And yet," the Primarch replied, "you stand in my ship." The silence stretched. Then it broke. A single shot rang out. The stormtrooper's bolt did not reach the Primarch. An ashen wrath warrior moved faster. The trooper's head disappeared in a mist of blood and shattered helm. The sound was deafening in the enclosed corridor. Everything ignited. Alarms howled through the ship's spine. Bulkheads slammed shut as machine spirits screamed binary prayers. The black ship outside released boarding torpedoes that punched through hull plating like nails through flesh. The first explosion tore through a gene vault. Fire howled through sacred chambers. The Primarch did not speak. He turned. The Inquisitor stepped back, drawing a weapon that shimmered with a field of disruptive light. A relic blade designed not to kill men, but to wound legends. "This is now a cleansing," the Inquisitor said. "Your legion will die quietly. You will not be martyred. You will be forgotten." He swung. The blade bit into the Primarch's shoulder. Reality screamed, not in pain, in protest. The Primarch caught the Inquisitor's wrist. The null field flickered. For a heartbeat, the thing behind his eyes surged. Not a servant of terror, not a loyal son of the Emperor, a butcher of fiends. The Inquisitor's eyes widened, not in fear, but in grim satisfaction. "So," he whispered, "there it is." Elsewhere, war erupted in steel corridors. Ashen Wrath warriors clashed with stormtroopers and null-bearers in tight, brutal silence broken only by bolter thunder and screaming servo motors. This was not a battle of honor. There were no banners, no vows, only extermination. Astartes moved like executioners. Stormtroopers died in disciplined formations. Null maidens advanced without sound, their very presence burning like acid against gene-forged souls. An Ashen Wrath captain was impaled through the chest by a phase spear and dragged into a field of nothingness, his death silent and absolute. The Primarch felt it. Every death of his sons echoed inside him, not as grief, as fuel. He twisted the Inquisitor's arm until bone cracked. The relic blade fell. The Inquisitor headbutted him, the rosette on his forehead sparking as it made contact with the Primarch's skin. "You are not in control of this," the Inquisitor said, coughing blood. "You were inserted. You were placed. Even your rebellion is designed." The Primarch froze. A whisper of uncertainty. Just a fraction. The Inquisitor exploited it, activating a device at his wrist. The ship groaned. Grav fields reversed for a split second, throwing bodies and blood into the air. Outside, the black ships opened fire. They did not target the fleet. They targeted specific decks, targeted his gene vaults, targeted his sons. The void lit up with silent light as localized annihilation warheads detonated. Firestorms gutted sections of the flagship. Hundreds of Ashen Wrath burned alive in their armor, their screams cut short by vacuum. The Primarch felt their extinction like nails driven through his soul. That was enough. He slammed the Inquisitor into the wall, cracking adamantium with the force of it. "You wanted truth," he said quietly. He leaned closer. "And now you have it." He did not kill the Inquisitor. That would have been mercy. He crushed the device on the man's wrist and threw him toward the breach as gravity snapped back into place. The Inquisitor barely caught the edge. Their eyes locked for a final second. "This war is bigger than you," the Inquisitor said. "Good," the Primarch replied. Behind him, his surviving sons rallied, bloodied, scarred, furious. They formed around him without command, their bolters roaring anew as they forced the boarding parties back meter by brutal meter. The black ships began to withdraw, not in defeat, in satisfaction. They had seen enough. They had confirmed their fears. They had lit a fire that could not be extinguished easily. The boarding clamps disengaged. The smaller vessel tore away, dragging the wounded Inquisitor back into the void. The silence that followed was not peace. It was aftermath. The flagship burned. The corridors wept steam and blood. The Primarch stood amid the ruin, surrounded by his surviving sons, feeling something far worse than the memory of another life. He felt betrayal, not from the Imperium, but from reality itself. He now knew something terrible was true. He had not stumbled into this galaxy. He had been placed within it, and someone, somewhere, had planned this war from the beginning. As the fleet limped away from the battlefield of their own near erasure, the Primarch stared into the void and felt the old fire rise higher than ever before. If they had made him a weapon, then he would choose where the blade fell. And somewhere in the warp, something vast and ancient began to smile, knowing the game had truly begun. The wound in reality did not open slowly. It tore. Across a forgotten star system, far from charted lanes and holy pilgrimage routes, the fabric of the universe screamed. The void twisted inward, folding like burning parchment, and from that impossible rupture spilled a storm of color that had no place in existence. The warp had broken through. The Primarch felt it before any augur sang its warning. The bridge of his battered flagship shuddered as if struck by a phantom blow. The lumen strips flickered. Servitors spasmed at their posts. The Geller field generators began to howl like dying beasts. Outside, space was no longer empty. It writhed. Colors that had no names bled into reality, painting the void with madness. Faces formed in the raw stuff of unreality, screaming silently as they were pulled into a realm that rejected them. Astropaths died in their thrones. They did not scream at first. They simply collapsed, their eyes melting from their skulls as they saw too much. The Ashen Wrath fleet pivoted in unison, weapons unlocking, machine spirits whispering ancient kill prayers. They had expected battle again. They had not expected the sky itself to betray them. The first demonic ship slid through the rift like a birth. It was not built. It had grown. A hull of fused bone and screaming metal, sails made from flayed, still-living skin, and a prow shaped like a leering skull that wept black fire. More followed. Dozens, hundreds, a flood. This was no isolated incursion. This was an invasion. On the plague world below, the sky split open as well. The air tasted of rot and violence. Oceans boiled, mountains cracked. Cities that had slept in ruin were torn further apart as reality itself began to rot. The Primarch walked to the viewing port, his massive form framed by warning runes and flickering light. His sons turned to him not for orders, but for permission. He gave it with a single nod. The void ignited. Macro cannons thundered, hurling cathedral-sized shells toward the approaching monstrosities. Lances of pure energy carved through demonic hulls, vaporizing flesh metal abominations. But for every ship destroyed, 2 more howled through the wound in space. Boarding shrieks echoed through the decks. Reality tore open inside the ship, not through airlocks, not through walls, through existence. Claws phased through steel. Grinning maws opened in solid metal. Demons poured into corridors that had never known such blasphemy. The Ashen Wrath met them without fear. Bolters roared, blades sang, blood sprayed in sacred arcs. The Primarch moved through his ship like a judgment-given flesh. His hands shattered demonic bone. His strikes tore warp entities from reality entirely, unmaking them rather than merely killing them. But he knew. This was guided. This was not random. He felt a pull from below, a gravity that did not belong to planets, something vast gathering at the heart of the world. "Set course," he ordered, his voice carrying through the chaos like iron dragged across stone. The fleet descended, through storms of unreality, through fire that burned cold, through screams that came from everywhere and nowhere. They broke into the atmosphere as the sky tore itself open again. The surface was no longer a planet. It was a battlefield between dimensions. A titanic warp fissure split the land in half, a gaping wound kilometers wide that vomited demonic legions into reality. Towers of twisted flesh climbed into the sky. Ritual circles burned across continents. Lakes had turned to blood and were beginning to boil. This was not an invasion. This was a foothold. The Primarch did not deploy by drop pod. He walked from the thunderous descent of his gunship. Ash and burning ichor clung to his skin as he stepped onto corrupted soil. Around him, his sons formed a wall of ceramite and fury, their weapons already roaring. From the fissure, the demons came in waves, hordes of clawed, horned abominations, flying things that screamed backwards, things that crawled like liquid nightmares over broken stone. He met them head-on. The ground became paste beneath his boots, the air filled with the stench of sulfur and sacred oils. Bolter shells lit the world like dying stars. And then the air went silent, not quiet, empty. Something stepped from the fissure that made the lesser demons flatten themselves in terror. A herald. Its body was long and stretched, wings dragging across the broken earth. Its skin was pale like old parchment, etched with runes that writhed as if alive. Its eyes burned with knowing. "You walk between lies," it said, its voice echoing not through air, but through thought. "You are not of this galaxy. You are not of your emperor. You are a fracture, a weapon dropped by careless hands." The Primarch felt the thing behind his eyes stir violently, recognizing the scent of the warp, the taste of something ancient and hateful. "This was inevitable," the demon continued. "Your arrival, your legion, your betrayal, the trap that opened for you, all of it was preparation." The fissure widened. Something far larger stirred within it, a pressure so immense that the atmosphere screamed as it tried to exist around it. The Primarch stepped forward, ignoring the herald, ignoring the lesser hordes clawing at his armor. He looked into the wound, and for a heartbeat, he saw not monsters, but a throne of screaming souls, a figure waiting, watching, planning. The battlefield froze in that instant. His sons felt it. The demons felt it. Reality felt it. Something terrible was about to cross into the world. Something that was not meant to be met by a Primarch born of war. The fissure expanded again, fire and darkness spilling outward in equal measure. And as the air tore itself apart, the question burned through the Primarch's mind like a brand pressed into raw flesh. Had he been forged to stop this coming horror, or to usher it into existence? The world did not break when it came through. It screamed. The fissure widened until the horizon was nothing but blood-red light and writhing shadow. Winds howled outward, flaying flesh from bone, stripping paint from ceramite, peeling prayer scrolls from armor. The very air turned bitter and metallic, thick with the taste of crushed souls. Then the thing emerged. It was not shaped like a man. It was not shaped like a beast. It was shaped like war itself. A colossal being of horned iron and burning bone stepped into real space, dragging a body forged from hatred and memory. Its chest was a cathedral of screaming faces fused together, its wings vast sheets of darkness edged with fire. Every footstep turned earth to blackened glass. The lesser demons did not cheer. They knelt. The ashen wrath opened fire in disciplined volleys, bolt rounds hammering into its hide. Explosions blossomed across its form, tearing chunks of corrupted flesh away, but the wounds closed as quickly as they were made. Sorcery coiled around it like a cloak, feeding it with screaming light. The Primarch walked forward. He did not slow. He did not hesitate. This was not fear. This was recognition. The demon's gaze found him. "You are familiar," it said, its voice scouring the air. "You smell of slaughter that is not ours. You wear hate like a second skin." The Primarch's hands clenched. The thing behind his eyes surged. Old corridors, old screams, old hells. He felt something tear loose inside him. Not possession, not corruption, alignment, not a servant of chaos, not a puppet of terror. Something older, something purer, a weapon without a master. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he moved faster, closing the distance in a blur of fractured earth and bending air. A titanic claw swung toward him, trailing fire and screaming faces. He caught it. The shock wave sent concentric rings of broken glass racing across the battlefield. The demon laughed, and the sky trembled with it. "You are not a son," it hissed. "You are a mistake given flesh." The Primarch twisted. The claw tore free. Black ichor poured out, boiling as it touched the ground. For the first time in 10,000 years, something like doubt flickered through the warp. The two collided, not as warrior and monster, as inevitability meeting inevitability. Wings smashed into the ground, horns shattered, bones struck ceramite. The air itself seemed to recoil from the violence of their struggle. The ashen wrath fought on around them, a storm of bolter fire and burning blade. They were insects beside titans, yet they did not retreat. This was what they had been built for, to stand in the shadow of their father's war and not break. The demon wrapped its talons around the Primarch's torso and hurled him across the blasted landscape. He struck a broken cathedral of mutated stone, the structure collapsing around him in a cloud of screaming dust. He rose immediately. Blood ran from his temple. Not black, not corrupted. Red, real. The demon descended upon him like a falling star. They crashed through the earth and into the edge of the fissure itself. For a heartbeat, they were half in the warp. Visions flooded him. Thrones of skulls. Endless slaughter fields. A universe that had never known the Emperor's light. A life where he had not worn ceramite, but runes. Where he had not served a god, but exterminated them. The demon saw it too. Its laughter became something strained. You were never meant to kneel, it realized. Neither to him, nor to us. The Primarch drove his fist into its chest, not with strength, with will. The cathedral of screaming faces cracked. Souls poured out, not saved, but freed from being part of the thing. The demon howled in rage and disbelief. It had expected a dead Primarch. It had not expected this. Outside, the fissure began to tremble. Reality strained. The Primarch wrapped his hands around the demon's horns. Their eyes locked. "You are right," he said. And for the first time, there was no doubt in his voice. "I do not kneel." He pulled. The horn skull split cleanly down the middle. Warp fire sprayed across the ruins like a rain of burning stars. The colossal body began to collapse, but it did not fall. It unraveled, thread by screaming thread. The fissure screamed as well, destabilizing, its edges flickering wildly. The battlefield froze again. The demons hesitated. The ashen wrath felt it. Their lord had crossed a line. He was no longer a loyal weapon. He was no longer a forgotten child. He was something else. Something walking the line between annihilation and salvation. The Primarch stepped back from the dying thing, his armor cracked, his flesh burned, his soul trembling with the echoes of truths that no servant of the Imperium should ever feel. He looked into the fissure. It was unstable now, violently so, and in that tearing light he felt another presence. Not chaos, not terror, something older, something that had watched him since his fall from his first hell, waiting, testing. The voice did not speak. It did not need to. The message was in the tremble of reality itself. The next choice would not be about victory. It would be about sacrifice. And as the demon finally unraveled into nothingness and the fissure shuddered violently, the Primarch understood the terrible truth that now lay before him. This war could not end with survival alone, only with loss, and he was about to be asked to lose something that could not be replaced. The fissure did not close when the demon died. It widened. Reality peeled back like rotting flesh, exposing a world that should not be seen by anything born of stars. The horizon twisted into impossible angles, and gravity became a suggestion rather than a law. The air turned thick, tasting of old blood and silent screams. The Primarch stood at the edge of it. The ashen wrath felt it behind him, the pull, the pressure, the wrongness of it all. Many of them dropped to one knee without understanding why. their gene-forged bodies trembling not from fear, but from proximity to something their souls were never meant to approach. From within the opening rose steps, they were not built, they grew, carved from fused skulls, layered bone upon endless bone, each one a pale monument to something that had died screaming in 1,000 wars. They formed a spiral path descending into the heart of the wound. The Primarch stepped onto the first. The world fell away. His sons tried to follow. An invisible pressure stopped them. This was not for them. This was not even truly for him. But he walked anyway. Every step echoed with the sound of cracking bone beneath his boots. Voices brushed against his thoughts, not speaking, not begging, simply existing in the way only the damned can exist. At the end of the spiral waited a throne. It was not gold, it was not iron. It was made of skulls, not stacked, fused, melted together in a grotesque mockery of a seat, their empty eye sockets glowing with the faintest trace of stolen life. Upon it sat something that wore the shape of a god. Its body was vast, but not in physical size, vast in presence, vast in weight. Its form shifted and stabilized with every breath of reality, as if no single shape could properly contain it. 4 shadows coiled faintly behind it, never fully forming, never fully retreating. It spoke, and the sound was not sound. It was memory made audible. "You have walked far for a relic," it said. "Born of slaughter, reforged by thieves, claimed by a corpse pretending divinity." The Primarch did not kneel. He did not bow. He stood before the throne as he had stood before hell. "Why?" he asked. The thing on the throne laughed, and skulls across the chamber cracked from the vibration. "Because you were never lost," it replied. "You were sent." The air thickened. Visions surrounded him, not pushed into his mind, but pulled from it. A vast, impossible machine. Hands that were not mortal and not divine tearing a hole through universes. A soul taken at the moment of triumph. A calculated throw across realities. He saw his fall again, not as accident, as design. "You were not reborn by chance," the entity said. "You were placed like a blade in the dark. The Emperor did not make you. The Mechanicus did not understand you. Even my children did not expect you." "Then who did?" he demanded. The thing leaned forward on its throne. Something in its shifting shape hardened. Ancient interest. "Something that is older than your gods," it said. "Something that does not sit on skull thrones, because it does not need symbols." Silence hung, heavier than gravity. The Primarch felt the truth not as revelation, but as resonance. He was not an accident. He was an answer. "Your war," the entity continued, "is not against chaos, not against terror, not against faith or heresy. It is against inevitability." The skulls beneath it writhed. "You were not given a choice," it said. "You were given a role. Drop the weapon. Let the game end here. Sit upon this throne. Become what you already are." The throne pulsed. It called. Not with corruption, with familiarity, endless war, endless killing. A place where he would never have to choose. The Primarch felt how easy it would be. To sit, to become. No emperor, no Imperium, no sons. Only eternal slaughter given form. His fist clenched. "I have sons," he said. A simple statement. A dangerous truth. For the first time, the entity on the throne hesitated. "You have legionnaires," it corrected. "Children," he said again. The air trembled. Behind him, far above, the fissure shook. Reality strained. The thing on the throne's tone shifted, not to anger, but to something colder. Regret. "Then you already understand the price," it said. "You cannot sit here and protect them. You cannot walk away and save them. That is the cruelty of what you are. The Primarch felt it clearly now. The consequence approaching. The choice waiting. He began to climb back. The steps shook under his weight. The skulls cracked, some screaming, others laughing. The throne watched him go, its countless empty eyes burning with knowing. You were made to break something, it called after him. Not today, not here, but soon. He emerged back into the screaming sky of the broken world. The ashen wrath looked at him through smoke and ash. Their father had changed. They saw it in the way he stood, in the way the air bent around him. The warp fissure pulsed violently, barely contained by failing reality. The Primarch raised his eyes to it, and the haunting truth echoed through his mind, planted there by a god of skulls. This war would not be won. It would only be paid for, and the payment would be him, or them, or something far worse. The ground trembled like a wounded beast. Cracks raced across the corrupted plains, splitting open ruins that had survived wars older than empires. The warp fissure pulsed violently, swelling and contracting like a heart on the verge of rupture. Light bled from it in violent colors that burned the eyes and twisted the shape of distant mountains. The Primarch stood before it. He felt the truth of it now, not as prophecy, as engineering. This was not a natural tear in reality. This was a wound meant to be opened, meant to be widened, meant to be fed. The words of the throne of skulls echoed through him. You were made to break something. Behind him, the ashen wrath formed up in silent ranks. Their armor was blackened, their purity seals burned away. Their weapons were cracked and foul with demonic ichor. They did not retreat. They never had. One of them stepped forward, not out of defiance, out of loyalty. My lord, the warrior said, his voice distorted by damage and heat. Give the word. We will stand between you and it until nothing remains. The Primarch looked at him. He saw no fear, no hesitation, only certainty. They would die for him, not because of gene coding, not because of conditioning, but because they had chosen him. That knowledge cut deeper than any blade. He turned back to the fissure. It was growing. The air screamed. The very concept of distance began to falter. He felt the presence of vast things pressing against the other side, testing the strength of the thinning boundary. This was not an invasion. This was a door being opened, and a door that could not be closed by force alone. Mechanicus warnings flooded into his mind, dredged from memories he did not remember learning. Warp law, rift physics, Geller harmonics, the terrible truth that only annihilation could seal something like this completely. Not destruction, obliteration. He looked at his hands. Hands that had broken. Hell. Hands that had torn through gods. Hands that now understood their role. He could close it. He could step into the fissure and tear its core apart. But it would not be a war. It would be a surrender of self. The Imperium would never know his name. Chaos would never fear him again. He would be erased at a level where even hate could not survive. He felt his sons behind him, their life signs, their souls. If he did nothing, the fissure would finish opening. Entire systems would burn. The Imperium would respond with exterminatus, and his legion would vanish in holy fire, condemned as failure or heresy. If he acted, he looked at them, raised a hand, and stopped them from coming any closer. No, he said. The word carried more weight than any command. The warrior stiffened. We do not fear what waits in there. I know, the Primarch replied. That was the problem. If they followed, they would not be erased. They would be corrupted, twisted, turned into mockeries of themselves. The fissure surged again. The skin of reality peeled further back. Screams flooded out, not of demons, of worlds, of cities dying before they even existed. The Primarch stepped forward alone. His armor cracked with every step, warp light crawling across its surface like living veins. His flesh burned, peeled, healed, and burned again in the impossible proximity. He stopped at the very edge. Behind him, the ashen wrath watched in silence, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to reach him. He turned to them. For the first time, he spoke not as weapon, not as war, but as something dangerously human. "You are not made to die monsters," he said. "You are made to make survival possible." They did not answer. Their vox grills were choked by emotion. They did not understand how to process. He stepped into the light. Pain beyond comprehension flooded him. Not from wounds, from unmaking. He felt his soul stretch. He felt reality reject him. He felt the thing behind his eyes claw at existence, furious, defiant, enraged. Not this way. Not like this. The fissure began to shrink, violently, unnaturally. The demons beyond it howled in rage and hunger. He reached its heart, a core of pure war pressure, a knot of universes trying to unbind from each other. He wrapped his hands around it and pulled. For a brief, impossible moment, he felt like he had in another life, ripping the heart from something that should not live. The light collapsed inward. The fissure screamed. Reality slammed shut like a wound cauterized by a dying star. Silence fell. True silence. The Primarch was gone. The ashen wrath stood in a world suddenly empty of demons, empty of whispers, empty of him. The ground stabilized. The sky returned to ash-choked normality. One of them fell to one knee. They began to search, not for salvation, for proof. Proof that he was not truly erased. Far away on Terra, the Golden Throne flared painfully for one brief second, and the Emperor felt something pass beyond his reach. In the warp, the Throne of Skulls cracked slightly, and in the silent aftermath of a war that could never be recorded, the burning question lingered in the air like ash. Had the Primarch just sacrificed himself, or had he been claimed by something far worse? Nothing collapsed, nothing celebrated. The silence that followed the sealing of the fissure did not feel like victory. It felt like absence, a missing weight in the galaxy, a pressure that had once been present and was now only remembered by those who had stood close enough to feel it tear away. The ashen wrath returned to their ships without orders. There was no triumph, only vacancy. The flagship drifted above the scarred world, its hull scorched, its decks broken, its machine spirits whispering in damaged canticles. No one spoke of what had happened. No one dared assign a word to what they had lost. They searched. They scanned every atom of space where the fissure had been. They probed reality with augers that should not have existed. They unleashed astropathic calls so loud that choirs of psychers collapsed singing them. There was nothing. No echo of a soul. No psychic shadow. No lingering imprint. He had not died. He had been erased. On Terra, prayers faltered. The Astronomicon flickered for a fraction of a second longer than it ever should have. Navigators felt a strange tug in their third eyes, like a presence briefly passing behind their sight before vanishing again. In the high halls of the Imperium, whispers began. They did not speak his name. They did not have one. They spoke of a legion that burned too cleanly, of a campaign that erased a warp breach without sanction or authority, of silence where there should have been noise. The High Lords convened in chambers of iron and incense, their voices layered with machine distortion and ancient indignation. "This is not a victory," one rasped. "This is contamination, said another. A third, voice cold and final, spoke what they were all thinking. This is a rogue legacy. Orders were written, then rewritten, then sealed with prayers older than entire civilizations. The ashen wrath would not return to glory. They would return to chains. Elsewhere, black ships stirred once more. The Inquisition had not lost interest. It had simply waited. They read the reports. They traced the warp fluctuations. They compared the residual absence left by the sealed fissure. One name appeared in a locked archive. Redacted, burned, recovered. They began to understand something terrible. The Primarch had not been designed to save the Imperium. He had been designed to destabilize it. But his absence, that was worse. The Ashen Wrath fleet received its summons while still in silent orbit. It was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was a command. Return, or be declared traitor. The warriors looked at one another through the dim light of war-scarred decks. Their helms hid their expressions, but their gene-forged hearts beat in slow, synchronized fury. Without their father, something else had taken root. Not rebellion, not heresy, resolve. They burned their own banners, removed their own sigils. They would not be paraded. They would not be celebrated. They would not be forgiven. They would be ready. The journey back into Imperial space felt wrong. Every star felt further away. Every warp jump felt heavier. Something moved in the Imperium, tasting the void left behind by what had happened. Demons were quieter. Warp storms shifted. Predators in nightmare space felt a faint, unfamiliar hunger. Far beyond the Emperor's light, the throne of skulls fractured further. The being that sat upon it did not move, did not rage. It simply observed. A game piece removed, or moved. The distinction mattered. On Terra, the golden throne groaned again under a weight no one understood. The Emperor felt it. A strange, cold absence where something had once burned very briefly, very brightly. Not grief, not relief, evaluation. The High Lord's final decree was sealed in blood and machine oil. The Ashen Wrath were to be monitored, contained, if necessary, erased. Across the Imperium, data slates adjusted themselves. Records shifted. A non-existent Primarch became an anomaly to be watched. A vanished war became a classified silence. The galaxy tightened its chains, around truth, around memory, around fear. The Ashen Wrath fleet slipped into a shadowed anchorage far from Terra's golden rot, engines silent, weapons cold, watching the stars with the patience of something that had lost its god. They felt it sometimes, a pressure in the void, a shadow brushing their hulls, a resonance in their gene seed that made their bones ache for a presence that had once stood among them. He was not gone, not truly. They knew that in the way only blood and war can teach. Somewhere, beyond warp and real space, something listened, something watched. And as the Imperium prepared quietly to turn on them, to bind them, to burn them if necessary, the greatest question of all began to coil through silent systems and forbidden archives. Had they just lost a savior, or had they unleashed something that had not yet finished being born? The world was ash. It had no name in any imperial record, no tithe grade, no pilgrim route. It was a dead thing drifting in silence, its surface cracked and fused by ancient wars that no one remembered. Wind howled across plains of black glass, carrying with it the dust of forgotten bones and rusted machine spirits. He stood alone upon its surface. The armor he wore was fractured, pitted, and scarred beyond recognition. No heraldry remained, no symbols of legion or emperor, only war scratches and burn marks carved across a ceramite shell that had crossed realities. He breathed. Each breath hurt, not physically, existentially. He remembered the light swallowing him, the way reality had folded inward, the sensation of being torn apart by laws that did not exist until they destroyed him. He should not have survived, yet he had. His boots left shallow imprints in the ash as he stepped forward, feeling the strange pulse of a world that did not belong to either realm. Not real space, not warp, a wound scar, a place discarded by existence. The horizon flickered unnaturally, the sky a constant bruise of grey and dying red. Lightning crawled silently through the clouds, but made no sound. He felt it then, that familiar pressure, that undeniable pull. War, not from ships, not from legions, from the fabric of reality itself. Across the stars, he could feel conflicts he could no longer see. Imperial worlds burning in sanctioned flame. Chaos warlords carving new empires from screaming planets. Tyrannid shadows swallowing light before it could scream. And somewhere, in the arteries of that vast, collapsing galaxy, the ashen wrath waited. He felt them. A faint resonance in his blood. A distant echo of loyalty that had not died with distance or time. They were still alive. They were being watched, hunted, measured. The Imperium was tightening its grip. The Inquisition was sharpening its blades. The galaxy had not found peace in his absence. It had simply grown more afraid. He looked down at his hands. They were larger than they should have been. Cracked, damaged, but steady, still capable, still dangerous. Behind his eyes the old fire stirred, not as rage, not as madness, as familiarity. He remembered now, not piece by piece, but whole. He remembered being something else, somewhere else, a warrior without throne or empire, a butcher of demons in corridors that stank of hellfire and abandonment. He remembered never kneeling, never bowing, never choosing anything but extermination. This galaxy had tried to make him a symbol, a Primarch, a savior, a weapon of a dying god. It had failed. The wind shifted, carrying something new across the dead world. A ripple, a disturbance. From the sky, a crack of light appeared. Not a warp fissure, not a rupture. A door. And through that tear in reality came a whisper. Not from chaos, not from terror. From something older. "You are not finished," it said. He did not answer. He did not need to. He stepped forward as the tear widened just enough to swallow him without drama, without light, without ceremony. Across the galaxy, at that same instant, several things happened. An Inquisitor's hand hesitated over a command rune. A High Lord felt an inexplicable chill. A navigator dreamed of a figure standing on a world of glass, staring back through their third eye. On the bridge of the Ashenwrath flagship, a warrior abruptly gripped the edge of a command console. A sensation burning through his gene seed, like a brand pressed into flesh. "He lives," the warrior whispered. Nobody asked how he knew. In the warp, the throne of skulls pulsed once, faintly, as if amused. On Terra, the Golden Throne systems dipped for a fraction of a heartbeat, and for the briefest instant, the Emperor of Mankind felt something pass beyond his sight. Not rebellion, not despair, motion. He emerged elsewhere, another dead world, another battlefield, another sky choked with ash and broken prayers. Ahead of him, in the far distance, he could see the faint silhouettes of war. Not one faction, many, orcs, demons, traitors, things that had never known names, all clashing, all screaming, all eternal. He walked toward it, each step a slow return to a truth that had never left him. He was not meant for thrones, not skulls, not gold. He was not meant to be remembered, or worshipped or forgiven. He was meant to be present wherever war gathered too thickly, wherever horror grew too bold, wherever annihilation pretended to be destiny. Behind him, the world cracked and faded, as if reality itself could not bear the footprint of something that did not belong to any universe. Ahead of him, bolt of fire thundered. Blades screamed. Creatures howled in pain and fury. He felt the old certainty return fully, not as duty, not as curse, as truth. There would never be peace. Not for him, not for the galaxy, not for anything born of war. And as he stepped into the smoke of a battle that did not know his name, the final, eternal thought burned through him like a prayer etched into bone. If the universe could not be saved, then it would be hunted forever. And somewhere far behind, in a reality that had already forgotten him, the unspoken question lingered, unanswered and eternal. Was he man, or was he the war that would never end?